Mike,
What's up, man?
what's up? Hey, I want to thank you for sitting down, having this conversation. Let's break the ice a little bit.
Yep.
You and I have a lot in common.
Yep.
We love sports. We love hoops. We both believe that the GOAT is Michael Jordan, number 23.
Recent convert. Recent convert.
convert. We spent, what was it, 5 weeks, 5 Sundays in a row watching The Last Dance together.
sir.
So let me ask you this. We both played basketball in high school. What was your favorite number, your jersey number in high school?
It was 23.
You had 23?
It was 23. My dad's a huge Michael Jordan fan, and so I grew up in a house where we respected greatness.
Okay.
And I was
Okay.
a 23 guy. And then when LeBron wore 23, I just took it for LeBron. So that's kind of where
It
I'm
made
at with
sense.
that. Yeah.
I had 33. I had to go with Scottie Pippen. And I think it was like my sophomore year of high school. And then my senior year was like, I think 50. So I got to go with 33, man. Freshman, sophomore year.
What happened with 50?
I don't know, man. I think 23 and 33 was probably taken.
Gotcha.
And I was a center. So I felt like the good, strong, bold number, the 50 just stood out for my 6'3", 160-pound frame.
I thought
as a center,
maybe, I was
so-
going to look at the timelines, like maybe it was like a 50-cent thing, which would be
Ooh,
interesting.
hey.
But I didn't know if the timelines matched up.
Didn't matter. Yeah, wouldn't have matched up. But I want to thank you for just sitting down and having this conversation. And we are in a very, I would say, saddened, shocked, and very sensitive. We're in a sensitive season right now in our world, obviously in America. And one of the things I think is so crucial right now, and I use this analogy so to kind of pick up from where I ended my sermon last weekend, is we need to seek to understand. And I think now more than ever, and we'll get into this dialogue in a minute, but I think there's power in conversation and having the right conversation at the right time. And it's the right time to do the right thing is right now. And so when it comes to having the right conversation, we want to do that, and we want to kind of get around the other side of the water bottle, because we both see the water bottle, but depending on where we're seated, we don't see the whole thing of what's written on that water bottle. And so this is kind of a conversation where you're on the other side of the table, I'm on this side of the table, but we're sitting at the same table. And I think conversation fosters understanding and unity, and I think that's the heart right now that I believe, that I'm praying for, that I believe is God's heart, that there's understanding in unity. And I have loved getting to know you over the past 2 years. And we entered into our relationship, not even talking about church. You moved here, and we connected over some Martin's barbecue.
Come on.
Shout out.
Come on.
And in that conversation, we just caught up. We were in the same town for a season of life, and we reminisced and we talked about the Illinois days, but then we just talked about life, and we caught up, and we just got to know one another. And it was from there that we began to foster and strike up relationship. And I've so appreciated how you have been so honest and transparent and so loving and compassionate. And when everything happened in recent weeks, in the past 2 weeks, with George Floyd, amongst many others, we had talked. We had a conversation over the phone, and you wrote this incredible piece, this spoken word piece that has gotten into the hands and into the feeds, social media feeds of so many people. And I've seen the impact that has had. But I was tossing around the idea, and then it just became a God thing, where it's like, Mike and I just need to sit down and have a conversation, because you're someone in our church who has a voice, but you've also had a voice in my life. And our families have commingled together.
Come on.
We've eaten together at each other's table. We've had conversations on your porch. You've had conversations on my porch long before any of this has happened, just because we loved and appreciated one another, and there was a mutual respect. And so I know that you're an artist, amongst many other things that you do. You're an incredible artist, and I think it's the job of an artist to lead to lead us to something, whether it's through music or it's through art or just drawing a picture or painting. You lead us to something, but you also lead the way out of something. And now is the time to have the right conversation. Our culture is having a conversation. Everyone's talking about the same thing. And I think conversations like this are so pivotal because I think we know that the conversations are happening in the culture. The culture is having a conversation, and my fear is that conversation is not bringing its way into the church. And I think we have 2 ears for a reason. I think we need to have one ear to what the culture is saying, and then one ear to what God's heart is saying about the culture. And I'm just thankful that we just get to sit down and have this conversation. And so as we come with a heart of understanding, I think hurt is something that must be heard before it's healed. And I think a lot of people are hurting right now. And I know in the midst of the atrocity and the murder of George Floyd has hurt a lot of people. And there's a lot of emotions right now. We see it, we hear it. Some of us are feeling it. Let me ask you, how are you doing just emotionally in the midst of what you saw and what you heard, and how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm hopeful, I'm angry, and I'm sad in that order. And I appreciate all those things you said about me, man. I think our gospel helps us understand this problem and gives us a solution. And so that's why I'm hopeful. Because I'm not surprised that the fall from our Creator has made its way into how we interact with each other based on race and ethnicity. So I'm hopeful because I think we have a solution.
Amen.
I'm angry because injustice angers our God. And when you see a blatant disregard for God's creative intent in making all of us in His image, it should move you to anger. And I'm sad because I look like George Floyd. And if I'm in the right community, let me put it this way, if I'm in the wrong community at the wrong time, it's someone's knee on my neck. And I think there's a growing body of research about this, man, and what trauma does to you. When I see George Floyd, I'm seeing myself. I'm seeing another person with black skin being executed by a person in authority, and that makes me sad. And I've cried more. I really only cry in 2 situations, man. Sports movies get me, and what I'm seeing lately, it gets me. And I appreciate what you said about the piece. I cried when I wrote it. I have never cried writing a poem or a song or anything before. And there was something that God was doing in helping me press on how I felt and how I think other people are feeling. So I'm hopeful, I'm angry, and I'm sad in that order. Well, really quick, man, I want to encourage people who don't have the gospel, or as we observe people navigate these times without the gospel. I'm only hopeful because of that. You take that gospel away from me, you just get anger and sadness. And that might give people a window into why they're seeing what they're seeing from different communities. Because the gospel's giving me hope. Our American government, right and left, they're not giving me hope. And so if you see anger and you see sadness, you should see that in me too. But there's something over and underneath that. And I wanted to make sure I talk about that first.
That's good. That's good. And I think as you were sharing that, I think the gospel, when you take the gospel message and you take the message of any social movement or any political agenda, the gospel is going to be hostile to both those things because the gospel is something that's holy. The gospel is something that's set apart. The gospel is a standard that trumps anything else, that overarcs anything that's an agenda driven, that has any kind of message, because the gospel message is a message that's set apart, that's like none other. Therefore, there's going to be anti-gospel messages, if you will. And because we live in a fallen world and we're fallen humans, we have to be discerning in this season. And so again, why conversation is so important. Let me mention just a couple names. Just sharing with us, as someone who's as we seek to look on the other side of the water bottle, can you share with us why these recent events and some of these names, Ahmaud Arbery, Christian Cooper, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, just a few of those names, why names like that and so many others have seemed to almost tip the scales a little bit, has tipped the scales and really caused kind of the Black community to rally together. There's almost a communal connectivity, a rallying cry, if you will, for equality and for justice. And so my question is, what was different about this situation with George Floyd, if there was? Because I mean, I'm 37,
Yeah.
and I've seen social injustices that have taken place over the years. I remember Rodney King and
Yeah.
in LA. I was a young boy. Was it in the early 90s? Is that right? Early
Yeah,
90s
yeah.
or late 80s? I remember seeing that, but there was something that was different about this situation with George Floyd, and I could be completely wrong, but what was it that maybe to you, if any, was different about this particular situation and this atrocity with George Floyd?
Yeah, I think it starts with the killings we saw in 2015 and 2016. So there were Mike Brown,
Okay.
and Trayvon, and Tamir, and all the names of brothers and sisters I don't know, because we're just talking about what was recorded.
Right.
So you have that groundwork, and then you probably haven't heard of this. There's a virus going around called COVID-19.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I can
Tell
send
me
you.
more.
I can
Yeah.
send you some links on that.
Okay.
I think what's happened is our country has been paused. So think about what everyone's doing. They're improving their home.
Wow.
Lawns are mowed.
Right.
Whatever needs painting was painted.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever needs fixing was fixed. It's a reflective time for our country. And it's an unprecedented time in our country. So in this moment of stillness where you have nowhere to go and nothing to do because everyone's closed, you see a man being killed for 9 minutes. And I think,
Yeah.
and again, I'll never say God is using COVID-19 for, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we were being still, and there's nothing for us to do but confront this.
Yeah.
I think what's happened before is we see an atrocity, but we got to get to work. We see an atrocity, but the kids
just
got to
gotta move
go.
on, yeah.
We got to move to the next thing. There's no next thing to move to. And I think we're asking ourselves with George Floyd, if this video that we have documented, the smirk on the officer's face, the 3 other officers who are sworn to protect, who are watching this man being executed, if this 9-minute video doesn't get us to change, what's it going to take? What's it going to take?
Yeah.
And I want to spend some time on all of the names we don't know, because this is not an isolated incident. This is happening across time zones, different cities, different parts of the country. This is not a regional issue. And yeah, I think where we are as a nation in a chapter of stillness has a lot to do with it. There's nothing for us to do but take care of it.
Yeah.
So let's take care of it.
Yeah. You mentioned some of the names that we don't know, but we know your name.
Yeah.
Mike Harris. And if you could bring some self-disclosure, and I think this is important for us as we seek to understand, but for you personally, Mike Harris, we love you, we know you. How have you personally experienced in your own life growing up?
Yeah.
How have you personally experienced things like racial inequality, discrimination, and injustice? Can you invite us into, again, we're talking about getting on the other side of the water bottle.
Yeah.
Can you invite us into what that looks like, your personal experience with those things growing up and even to the current 2020 right now?
Yeah, man. Full disclosure, grew up upper middle class. Parents always had good jobs. I was followed in a store for the first time at age 12. We were at Von Maur. I was buying some AN1 jumpsuits, color coordinated. Had some things, it was like royal blue. It was dope, man. It was super dope. And my man, who still works at Von Maur, actually, I saw him last time I was back home.
Still employed.
Still employed at Von Maur. Follows me around and says, "Hey, just so you know, that's really expensive." So that's the first incident I remember. When I was in first grade, my first grade teacher, her dad was a known, an active leader in the Ku Klux Klan chapter in Indiana. And I didn't know it at the time because I was 7, but all I knew is I wasn't going to recess a lot. That's all I knew. And I told my parents, and everyone knows that look in their parents' face that's like, I'm mad, but not at you. And you're kind of scared, but also happy, because I'm like, I don't know who y'all are mad at, but I don't want to be them. And they followed up with the school, and it turns out this teacher had been discriminating against me because I was Black. And I'm 7. So we have 7, we have 12, we have 16. I'm coming out of my high school after basketball practice, and cop pulls me over. I'm pulling into where I live. He says, "Aren't you kind of far from home?"
Wow.
Right. And I said, I didn't have the best response. The gospel hadn't taken root just yet. That's the 16. I'm in college at 21, and a cop says, "Hey, you fit the description of someone who just stole from a bookstore down the street. I need to ask you a few questions." I'm 24. I'm giving a presentation at State Farm. I've already been hired. And people say, "You're so articulate." Right? And people think that's a compliment, but you're just saying you thought I was dumb before I started talking, and then you were surprised by what came out of my mouth. So you can see 7, 12, 16, 21, 24, and a ton of microaggressions, man. I've been in gas stations where I walk past someone and they hold their purse tighter. I was in a Target once where a little boy pointed at me and said, "Look, Mom, a gangster." And this is happening to me. And so when you see, when you've experienced that from 7, and I'm 7 when I don't remember, but I know it happened, you just see it happen over and over and over and over and over again, you become exhausted and you become angry. So there's a few examples that I'm aware of, and I don't have access to all the conversations that took place about me that I wasn't aware of. So hopefully that sheds some light on what's still going on today, man.
So let me ask you this. Do you feel like your experience is the majority of other Black brothers and sisters that live in America? Is it just exclusive to you? With the conversations that you had, was there a moment in your life where you're just like, "Oh, this is probably just me," or did you have those conversations with other Black friends that were just like, "Me too"?
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, let me tell you my story."
Yeah.
What was that like for you to even to have? Did you have that? And if you did, what was the dialogue like amongst your friends and amongst even your family growing up?
I was lucky. My experiences, because of my parents' employment and the kind of life they could provide for me, most people assumed I was okay. I was an okay.
Wow.
When I talk to some of my brothers and sisters who grew up in different socioeconomic environments and different communities, their assault on their identity was much more hostile. And so I realized that I had it pretty good.
Wow.
I had 5 or 6 interactions, never got physical, never got violent. I got to go home. I'm from a smallish town, enough to where most people in the community knew who I belonged to, my parents. And so most people knew, I was in a lot of rooms where people knew who I was. And I was lucky. That protected me in a lot of ways. It wasn't until I moved away I realized how much of that protection was. But for a lot of people that look like me, they don't get the benefit of the doubt, man. They don't get the benefit of the doubt. If you're in a neighborhood where people look and they start assigning value, human value, based on your socioeconomic status, people aren't getting the benefit of the doubt in those communities.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. As you're sharing, I've been doing my due diligence and trying to learn and to listen. And it dawned on me in recent weeks that as a father, there's certain conversations that are preparatory conversations that I know one day are going to come, that I'm going to have certain conversations with my children, particularly my boys. And so when a father has a conversation with his son, for example, you have 2 wonderful, beautiful boys at home. When I'm thinking about my boys, Blaze and Tribe, I'm thinking a couple conversations kind of come to mind that I have to have with them. One, the birds and the bees. You got to teach them about sexuality. You got to teach them about how they arrived on planet Earth, right? Because they start asking questions, and at some point, you're going to have that conversation. There's probably going to be another important conversation for them somewhere in their teens where they need to be ushered into manhood. A rite of passage where there's going to come a day where you're going to leave the house and you're stepping into manhood. You're no longer a boy, you're a man now. And there's probably some other smaller conversations that are significant for their well-being and for them to flourish in this world and to flourish as a man of God. And it dawned on me that there's probably conversations that I'm not going to plan on having when it comes to their safety and that kind of flourishing.
Yeah.
And so with that, I want to ask you, what kind of conversations right now, what kind of conversations with your boys, Mikey and Miles, when he gets to that place, because he's still a little guy, what kind of conversations have taken place?
Yeah.
But for you right now as a man of God, right now, what kind of conversations are you planning on and preparing on and anticipate having with your son and sons when the time is right?
Yeah, I think the first one is both of my black sons need to be reminded daily who they are. Because you're going to move into society and they're going to start telling you something different. They're going to start telling you that you're dangerous and that you're dumb and that you're not capable and that you're hot-headed. So the first thing is to remind my sons daily of who they are. There's going to be a practical conversation that my dad had with me. I was like 12 or 13.
Okay.
If you ever get pulled over by a police officer, here's what you need to do. You need to put your hands where he can see them. You need to be level-headed. You need to call me as soon as the officer says it's okay so that I can be on the line. Because if you do anything that makes you come across as a threat, he's going to meet that threat with violence. You don't get to be a black boy in this country for very long. You get to be a boy until about 8 or 9, and then you're a man. And you're a man who's dangerous. And when people hear that, sometimes they don't understand. They don't understand, like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And what I mean is, society is going to allow you to be a black boy for just a little bit. And then you're going to be a black man, and there's certain rules, and there's certain things you got to know. And my kids need to know that. They need to know that if I'm not with them and a police officer pulls them over, you need to listen quietly and do everything that they say. You need to call me as soon as the officer says it's okay, so that I can be on the line. And it's heartbreaking because my kids should just be a kid. But here's where I'm hopeful. I don't need pop culture, American culture, hip hop culture. I don't need anyone to tell my sons who they are, because I know who they are. I know who God says they are, and we lead with that. We lead from a place of identity. I think we're going to talk about a little bit earlier the Imago Dei and what that means to me, and the creative intent of our God, and that my black skin is not a mistake.
Amen.
It's not an error.
That's right.
He didn't keep me in the oven too long. Different things that I've heard.
Wow.
I'm black on purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm black with a heavenly seal of approval. And black boys and girls and brown boys and girls need to hear that. I need to know that. I need to internalize that. And the church needs to be the ones telling them that, because they're going to hear something else.
Yeah.
They're going to hear something else.
Wow. Thank you for that. That is, I think that is incredibly enlightening, and I hope that we would take that to heart. And I think for some of us, that when we hear that and we hear you self-disclosing, all of us have a social bias.
Yeah.
Every one of us. And I've been learning a lot about what's called grouping. I've been learning a lot about that this week. But there are social narratives that every single one of us listen to. There's stories that we hear that shapes how we see the world from a very young age growing up. That the information that we get from our parents, from our friends, from our neighbors, we talked about culture. Culture is one of them. Develops the lens and the filter through which you interpret everything. But what we don't understand is that my social narrative is only one of 7 billion.
Yeah.
And I love Pastor Miles McPherson's so helpful here. But he talks about that you don't know what you don't know. And every one of us has a blind spot. And I think for us on the other side of the table, and for a lot of people, when they start to have conversations of people who don't look like them, who had a different upbringing, my social narrative is different than yours, and yours is different than mine.
Yeah.
They're not wrong, they're different.
Different, yeah.
But if we don't humble ourselves and try to come with a heart of understanding, to have other lenses, like the conversation we're having, to shape our social bias, to shape the narrative that we were conditioned to seeing and believing growing up, that we need to have that, because I think that there's something so important about having this conversation and hearing the things you just said about Mikey and Miles, and the conversation that you had with your dad, the Von Mar experience and the ones that you had mentioned, there's something about walking in someone else's shoes. Someone once said it this way: the deep importance of is that when you get to know, or when you wash somebody else's feet, you find out why they walk the way they do. And there's something about honoring people and hearing the things in the conversation that we're hearing right now. Because like you said, everyone is made in the image of God, but we should not let our social bias truncate that.
Sure.
We shouldn't let our social narrative that we had, again, it's not wrong, but maybe it wasn't complete.
Right.
Let me mention this, and we're going to get to, I want to get really quickly here to the video, the spoken word video. But as you're talking, and you used anger as one of the words to describe, would you feel comfortable speaking to maybe the false dichotomy that exists, that all Black people are anti-authority and anti-police? And I think there needs to be some clarity brought into that. And would you speak to that?
Yeah, it's a deep conversation.
Yeah.
Let me make it very personal, and then we'll kind of talk
Please.
about it from a macro lens. So when I'm 12 and I find out that my first grade teacher was employed with her father being an active member of the Ku Klux Klan, and that this teacher has been performance managed for discriminatory behavior, you know what that erodes? It erodes my faith in teachers and in authority. When you see that, and just for some context, I think sometimes we forget or we're hostile to, man, and I hope this isn't controversial, it's not my intent. We're hostile to our actual history. And so we've created a dynamic where the Civil War was America versus somebody else. And the Civil War was America fighting for the freedom of Black and brown people, and America fighting for the slavery and oppression of Black and brown people. Two things can be true at one time. The Civil Rights Movement was people fighting for equality for Black and brown people, and people saying 3/5. There's 40% gap there. It's America on both sides of that conversation. So when you hear Black and brown people express distrust in America or express anger with our country, I want everyone to take a step back and say, we've all had different experiences in this country. Illustration that's been so helpful for me is there's a dad, and we're his two sons, right? Gets us both Jordans and bikes and Nintendos, whatever else is cool and relevant. But every once in a while he hits me. Could be once a day, could be twice a day. Maybe he takes 6 weeks off, but he'll come back eventually. He won't hit you, but he'll hit me. And we grow up, and someone asks us about our dad. We're gonna have different answers. Now what's happened, I believe what's happened, my perspective, is the kid who was never hit keeps telling the kid who was hit what their dad is like. Not only are, I'm using you in this illustration, not only are you not willing to hear my actual experience, you're hostile to it. You're telling me to be quiet. You're telling me that I'm wrong. And imagine if we watched that play out on a TV show or movie, we would say, this kid is being obscene. This is ridiculous. You won't even listen to what they're saying. And I think we've kind of got to a point where Black people, while they are grieving about the injustices that we face by people of authority, we also need to be politically correct as we communicate that. So if people say, well, why are Black people anti-police? Black people aren't anti-police. We're anti-police brutality. And we have documented, filmed examples of where this is happening. Now I'm gonna ask people who are watching this to think critically. Do you think it's just those 9 examples that we talked about? Do we think that the man who took George Floyd's life, you think he woke up that day and that was the first time he's made a racially charged comment or action in the history of his employment? You don't think in the time that he was a police officer, there was a few conversations, a few choice words, a few situations where you could see racial bias and no one did anything about it? And when Black and brown people are so frustrated, that's what we're frustrated about. And so Black people are not anti-authority. Black people are not anti-police. But we have to sit in the reality that our country has been both an oppressor and a liberator, both a hero and a villain. And if we're not willing to sit in that reality, if we're so closed off, so going back to my illustration, if we're so closed off from the kid who is hit, we don't want to hear their perspective. What does that say? What does that say? And I think that's where we are, where people are wanting nuance while people are grieving. People are grieving. And I would encourage all my white brothers and sisters who are watching this, and I say brothers and sisters in Christ because I believe we're the people of God. I think we're the hope of the world. Yeah. Right now is a great time for you to listen. It's a great time for you to listen. Yeah. Want to hear your ideas? Down the road. Want to hear your perspective? Down the road. Want to hear your solutions? Down the road. Right now, I just need you to listen. Yeah. Let's start with listening. 2020, let's listen. Yep. Let's listen to what our dad is like. Both sides. And then we'll have a better understanding of the context at which the gospel is stepping into, because my fear is we're asking the gospel to move into a place that doesn't exist. And then we're wondering why it's not. Why isn't there change? Why isn't there life change? Why isn't there justice? Why isn't there equality? Because we're not letting it into those spaces. When you and Kim moved to Nashville, I'm sure we've had conversations like this. You learn the area. Where do people get coffee? Where do people work out? Yeah. And we have to get to that point to where we're an expert in our history, so that when something like this happens, we can meet it with action. Hey, we're not on our heels. We know this is something that we've struggled with since our country was founded. So why are we surprised? Why are there communities of faith that are hostile to the idea that we have a race problem in America? We're not hostile to any other idea. And that's where, as people of color, it's exhausting to sit at a table, to have experience and have someone invalidate their experience because they didn't experience it. Yeah. Doesn't make it true or less true because you didn't go through it.